The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. His mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said, "I'll eat you up," so he was sent to bed without eating anything. Maurice Sendak's classic children's picture book, Where the Wild Things Are, was first published on November 13, 1963, and while only 40 pages long, with just as many of its pages devoted to its sparse prose as to its unforgettable images, it's become an inextricable piece of millions of lives. Sendak both wrote and illustrated 18 books, and illustrated dozens more for other authors by the time he passed away on May 8, 2012, at the age of 83. But he'll always be defined by the story that burned itself into the hearts and minds of countless readers, young and old. A story of childhood, imagination, and the longing for connection. What makes Where the Wild Things Are a truly magnificent piece of art, designed to capture a child's experiences, is that there is something innately true to the interior life of a child that is lived out through these pages. What's even more impressive is that Sendak was already 35 years old when it was published, and would go on to create more and more children's books the further removed from childhood he became. But Sendak vividly pulled from his fears, joys, and anxieties as a child to create this land of almost terrifying make-believe. It was the result of a difficult, often traumatic childhood that lent itself to an honest but comforting career in creating children's books. Altogether, Where the Wild Things Are is composed of only 10 sentences, but when combined with Sendak's art, they paint an incredible vision. A vision of the wildness of childhood, the unknowable depth of imagination we access at an early age, and a reconciliation between parent and child that's needed for healing. Journey with me to the land of the wild things and into the life of Maurice Sendak, and let's learn how Where the Wild Things Are became a classic of children's literature by its honest grappling with childhood fears, death, and healing. That very night in Max's room, a forest grew, and grew, and grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. There are few things as magical as encountering a new story at just the right age. And if you grew up with Sendak's classic, you probably don't even remember the first time you read it. It's a part of the very fabric of your childhood, but its ideas, images, and underlying themes are just as deeply tied to Sendak's own early years. Sendak was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1928, and spent the entirety of his childhood in the city, raised by two Polish-Jewish immigrant parents who had left Europe shortly before the Holocaust. But from an early age, Sendak was frequently devastatingly ill, and, without the strength to leave his home, an often shifting array of apartments due to his parents' forced to constantly move out of poverty, the soon-to-be author spent months on end in his bedroom, looking out his window at the world and the people passing him by outside. With nothing else available, Sendak was forced to leverage his own imagination as much as possible to entertain himself. Windows are a recurring theme in Sendak's books. There is, of course, a prominent open window in Where the Wild Things Are, but nothing is as obviously indebted to Sendak's childhood experience as his first book as author and illustrator, Kenny's Window, where a young boy imagines an impossible world of dreams in the night outside and goes on an adventure beyond his window. In Outside Over There, our hero Ida's baby sister is stolen by goblins who come in through the window, which she ventures out of to bring her back. And there's In the Night Kitchen, where another young boy tumbles out of his window at night and into a strange world of cuisine and somewhat terrifying bakers. If there's a lingering through line of danger and fear to these books despite their childhood contexts, it's because Sendak also translated a sense of fear and a constant awareness of death from his own childhood. According to Sendak, when I was young, the big events were being sick and being expected to die, and knowing that at a very early age, I might. This was spoken. My parents were very indiscreet, so it was the awareness at a very early age of mortality which pervaded my soul, apparently, and I think provided me with the basic ingredients of being an artist. It wasn't just his own illness that created his deep awareness of death. Sendak's mother and father had both left Poland to pursue their dreams in America, only for the Holocaust to begin a few years later. Both lost almost their entire families to the Nazis' genocide. It's something that would haunt his parents and a guilt that weighed down his father for the rest of his life. Children in his neighborhood would die from illness. A friend died after being hit by a car while they played catch. Sendak's sense of instability and danger was never assuaged by his parents. He felt he could never turn to them for reassurance. Instead, it was his older sister and brother that provided the strength and love he needed to get through his early years. But despite Sendak's work tapping into a sort of inexplicable fear that grows within children of even the most harmless objects, the author himself was terrified of the vacuum cleaner and Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. There's also a warmth and comfort that wouldn't be possible without it. The kidnapping and death of Charles Lindbergh's baby in particular scarred Sendak. According to the author, it nearly drove him insane from fear. The kidnapping and rescue of the baby sister in Outside Over There is the author's way to reconcile with and heal that trauma, while praising his own sister as a caretaker. Because to understand the difficulties of childhood is to be able to soothe them in a way that's impossible if we forget what it's like to be a child as we grow older. Sendak would only come out as a gay man late in life, keeping his personal life private to prevent persecution in mid-century America, and preventing any scandal that would wrongly come from the reveal that a gay man was writing books for children. Sendak was with his partner Eugene Glynn for about 50 years, and when Glynn passed away in 2007, Sendak continued to write and draw through the pain. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through night and day, and in and out of weeks, and almost over a year, to where the wild things are. Prior to becoming an illustrator, Sendak received very little formal training. Instead, he simply had a passion for drawing from childhood, and eventually worked as a part-time assistant filling in backgrounds on All-American Comics strips. "I spent hundreds of hours sitting at my window, sketching neighborhood children at play," said Sendak. "There is not a book I have written or picture I have drawn that does not, in some way, owe them its existence." Sendak became a window display artist in Manhattan after high school, then started a wooden toy business with his brother Jack, where Maurice was in charge of painting and decorating the figures. The toy business didn't succeed, leading Maurice to become the window display artist at FAO Schwartz before being hired by Harper & Row children's editor Ursula Nordstrom to illustrate his first children's book, Marcel Ames' The Wonderful Farm. From there on, Sendak was a full-time illustrator, and much of the 1950s saw him slowly expand the breadth of his style and content of his work under the stories of other authors, with Minder de Jong being a frequent collaborator, moving out of using only pen and ink and adopting brush and wash. Eventually, Sendak published his first book as both author and illustrator, Kenny's Window, in 1956, and its embrace of childhood imagination paved the way for his most famous work. Where the Wild Things Are tells a simple story. A young boy, Max, is sent to his room without supper by his never-seen mother after running wild in his home. And while in his room, Max imagines himself sailing away to the land of the wild things. Giant, strange beasts that he soon tames and becomes the king of, letting his most wild impulses run free until he misses being at home and loved, soon returning to find a lasting token of his mother's affection. I absolutely adore Sendak's art in Wild Things. By 1963, the creator had been having his work as an illustrator published for 16 years, and the book finds him at a fascinating moment in the evolution of his art. Wild Things sort of looks like nothing else he ever made, thanks to its heavily cross-hatched penwork and an embrace of bulbous, gentle figures that make even the sharp-toothed and clawed monsters feel safe. It's also a remarkable work of subtle framing and pacing, as the growth of Max's imagination informs how its art fills the pages. It's here in the growth of the world of the Wild Things that Sendak subtly plays with form to illustrate Max's growing imagination. The first several pages confine Max's life to a small square with lots of white space surrounding it on the page. And although Max is running amok, his world is as small as the room he's sent to by his mom. But once Max imagines an escape for himself, the frame grows with each page, first becoming a bigger and bigger box, then a full-page splash encroaching on the opposite-facing page, and then spread across the top half of 2 pages, as Max comes to where the Wild Things are. What Max is imagining has completely consumed and overwritten the drab reality he's found himself in, Until finally, the Wild Rumpus begins, and we're treated to 3 wordless double-page spreads of Max and his monsters on the loose, doing whatever they wanted with Max as their king, a young boy at home with the creatures his mother called him, at least for now. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth, and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. When you look at the evolution of Wild Things, you can really see Sendak's vision for not just the idea of the book, but the really unique visual style come into focus over the course of almost a decade of on and off work to bring it all to life. Wild Things' first dummy book, which is essentially a rough mock-up of how the book and the illustrations will flow, is dated November 17th, 1955, and is titled Where the Wild Horses Are. But when the author found drawing horses to be difficult, he shifted to an interpretation of the Yiddish term wilde Chaya, used for a wild child. Sendak's Jewish lineage also informs the way his creatures came to life. Said Sendak, I wanted them to be very, very personal, and they had to come out of my own particular life. And I remember it took a very long time until that gestation occurred, and where they began to appear on drawing paper, and they began to be what I liked. And it was only when I had them all that I realized they were all my Jewish relatives. And they all say the same dumb thing while you're beating time until food gets put on the table. How big you are, and how fat you got, and you look so good we can eat you up. In fact, we knew they would because my mother was the slowest cooker in Brooklyn, so if she didn't hurry up, they would eat us up. So my entertainment was to examine them closely, you know, the huge nose and the hair curling out of the nose and the weird mole on the side of the head. And so you would glue in on that, and then you'd talk about it with your brother or sister later, and they became the Wild Things. These Wild Things exist as entirely preformed, fully alive creatures. There's no explanation for them. They simply live as they always have. And the ways in which Max tames them and celebrates with them have no explanation. They simply are because this is how they come to be in the minds of children. Sendak's grammar is short and clipped, but its steadfast focus and repetition creates a type of easy-to-understand poetry for young readers. Ideas like a magic trick or traveling across a period of time communicate a child's understanding of the world. And in doing so, young readers accept these concepts, and adult readers are forced to change their perspective. And while the Wild Things may be scary to some, Max's lack of fear puts the reader at ease. Till Max said, "Be still," and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. And they were frightened and called him the most wild thing of all, and made him king of all wild things. What Sendak often does in his books is to make a child's imagination a critical part of the story, both allowing the reader to see how a protagonist's mind creates the strange world around them, either on purpose or through a dream, and then blurring the line of reality and fantasy. Often, Sendak embraces a sense of magical realism, with the events of imagination, dreams, and play impacting reality and never choosing to clearly define where the dream world ends and the real world begins. And in this, we see an understanding of how the developing mind of a child perceives the world around them, in an innately different way than an adult. And to understand, accept, and embrace that is a truly wonderful thing. The imagination of a child is a marvelous asset, and we all, at some point in our lives, have it in us. And while children's entertainment is meant to appeal to that energy and imagination that defines so much of childhood, the imagination itself is often missing from these stories. The stories that do embrace imagination as an element of their actual narrative are special and rare. Think of A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh, where Christopher Robin's imagination is within every inch of the 100-acre wood. Pooh's life and thoughts blur the line between reality and play. Or, more recently, Bluey, where imagination and play are in every story, but always shown as the Healer family embracing play and helping the children to learn and express themselves through their imagination. The interior life of a child is a mystery to everyone. It's a mystery to even the most loving parent. It's even a mystery to the child themselves, who doesn't understand why they think the things they do and are scared of the things that terrify them. Like any story revolving around a young protagonist, there are 2 avenues of interacting with a text. You either self-identify as the young hero, taking on the struggles and triumphs of someone like Max or Kiki, seeing their trials and tribulations as reflecting your own. Or you see yourself as one of the adults in their lives, being concerned for them, proud of them, and rooting for them along the way, as someone apart from yourself but who you love dearly. That doesn't mean your own story is over, but that you have to make room for another person's story to begin. In recent years, I've come to find that I no longer identify with Kiki, but I'm more proud of her than I've ever been before. "And now," cried Max, "let the wild rumpus start." Today, Where the Wild Things Are is a classic of children's literature. It's one of the most lauded picture books of all time, with it winning the prestigious Caldecott Medal from children's librarians in 1964. Over the decades, it's gone on to sell more than 20 million copies around the world, but it took Sendak 4 years to get it published, with Harper and Row editors finding it to be psychologically dark and disturbing. And for decades after it was published, Wild Things was frequently banned in schools and libraries across the southern United States for its streak of anger and fear in both mother and son. Child psychologist Bruno Bettelheim wrote, "What Sendak failed to understand is the incredible fear it evokes in the child to be sent to bed without supper, and this by the first and foremost giver of food and security, his mother." And yet, this is why Sendak's classic speaks to children and adults alike. This is ultimately the story of a child's unbridled emotions, anger, and fear, lived out through and reconciled by imaginative play. In the end, Max's anger and worries are met by a mother's steadfast love, made present in the simple gesture of that supper waiting for him. In the 60 years since it's been published, there have been several Wild Things adaptations. An animated short from 1975, a children's opera by Oliver Newson from the 80s, lots of homages in music and animation, and a live-action film in 2009 by Spike Jonze and Dave Eggers, which would, bewilderingly, lead to a novel adaptation of the film adaptation titled The Wild Things. Jones's Wild Things is, by the very nature of being a feature-length adaptation of a 40-page kids' book, a very polarizing extrapolation of Sendak's story, putting its ideas of fraught parent-child relationships and the terror of childhood up front, and often in ways that would frighten young viewers. Of course, it looks amazing, and seeing the Wild Things in Max brought to life in ways that honor Sendak's artistic vision is incredible. But by lacking the gentle touch of Sendak's approach and being a dark, mature story wrapped in a kids' movie shell, it's a real case of, who is this movie for? On Sendak's part, however, the movie was a delight because Jonze made it his own. "I've never seen a movie that looked or felt like this," Sendak said. And it's his personal this, and he's not afraid of himself. He's a real artist that lets it come through in the work. So he's touched me. He's touched me very much. "Now stop," Max said, and sent the Wild Things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then, all around from far away across the world, he smelled good things to eat, so he gave up being king of where the wild things are. But the wild things cried, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you up. We love you so." And Max said, "No." The older you get and the further removed you are from your childhood, the more you begin to wonder how you got to where you are today from where you were then. What happened to all those dreams, all those hopes, all those fears? Your parents, your siblings, your grandparents, your friends. When you're little, they're the entire world, and you could never imagine a life without them. But one day, you look around and nothing's what you imagined. And then you realize that you are to others what they were once to you, and someday you'll be gone too. But what you do with the time you have will last forever in the hearts and minds of everyone you touch. The older I get, the more I see everyone I know change, slowly but strongly. But when I look at them, I see everyone they used to be, almost trailing behind them in a line that keeps growing. And I just hope they know that at all of those moments, they've been loved. No matter how old you are, no matter how you've been scared and scarred, I hope that someone loves you deeply. The wild things roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. But Max stepped into his private boat and waved goodbye, and sailed back over a year and in and out of weeks and through a day, and into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him, and it was still hot. Thanks for watching today's video, and I know this is a very different type of subject for the channel. But if you look at the themes and art of Where the Wild Things Are, I don't think this is all that surprising within the context of the many different types of videos I've done. After all, it is about monsters and fear and worries and healing, which are ideas that I think pop up in a lot of my subjects. And of course, I have done a lot of videos in the past about illustrated books. Those have just been mostly comic books. So I hope that you enjoy taking this ride with me to the land of the wild things, and to one of the all-time great pieces of children's literature. Like I'm sure is the case with many of you, I have read and loved Where the Wild Things Are since I was very little. And I really don't even remember the first time that I read it, but its story and its images have been burned into my mind for decades. And yet, I never knew all that much about the life of its author. And my research into Maurice Sendak revealed to me a man that was both haunted and able to bring healing to a lot of other people's lives. He was a fascinating figure. And if you're interested, I highly recommend checking out lots and lots of interviews with him. Because over the course of his career as an author, Sendak opened up to a lot of different people. And I highly recommend all of the fresh air interviews from Terry Gross that Maurice Sendak did over the decades for NPR. Learning more about Sendak and his life gave me another layer of appreciation for Where the Wild Things Are, and for many of the other books that he made. And while I'm not the biggest fan of the Spike Jonze film, I know that it does have its fans. But I don't think it will ever replace Sendak's book in the hearts of anyone. I'd love to hear what you think about Where the Wild Things Are, and what were the most formative children's books for you when you were growing up. Being read to and reading at an early age formed so much of my personality and passions. As always, I'd like to give a thank you to my patrons for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. Right now, we're going through the filmography of Hayao Miyazaki, and by the time this video has been published, I will have already done podcast reviews of Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro, and Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, with many more to come only on Patreon, because Studio Ghibli loves to give a copyright strike. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves, and taking a moment to reconnect with and love the wild thing within you.